Welcome to the first episode of Free Space News. So this is my first actual content-related episode. So I said when I posted the first video that I wanted to kind of explain the meaning of the channel and also the logo. So the meaning of Free Space News, it's kind of almost a shot at, if you've been reading articles about what's happening sometimes on college campuses, you'll hear about this term called safe space, where people can go if they, are, sort of scared of confrontation, or there's an issue that might offend them or something like that. And I just wanted to sort of kind of fire back on that a little bit and call this a free space, because that's what it is. I'm going to discuss really controversial topics, and I'm going to have opinions that are different than yours sometimes, and that's okay. I want this to be a place of not only news and facts, but also discussion. If the channel actually grows, I'm sure the comments section is going to be as typical as normal YouTube comment sections are, but that's fine. I generally consider myself a liberal person, but I tend to think that liberals have been not great on the issue of free speech, and I really want this to be an open area of free speech. So that's sort of where the name comes from. The logo is the main part that I wanted to discuss is the magnifying glass with the eye in it. I just really like that design, and I thought it kind of is like an eye, watching power, for example. That's another thing I want to do is, I kind of want to criticize power on both sides of the aisle, and really wherever I see it, whether that be from government or the mainstream media or whatever. So yeah, with that I'll move right into the main story today. So an article from The Hill is reporting that Nancy Pelosi yesterday, on Thursday, was confirmed to another term as Speaker of the House. So they say, quote, "Representative Nancy Pelosi on Thursday seized the Speaker's gavel for the second time in a dozen years, making a historic return to power for the nation's first female speaker and ushering in what promises to be a new era of oversight for President Trump and his administration." Pelosi won the speakership in a 220 to 192 vote over Representative Kevin McCarthy, the House Minority Leader. 12 Democrats voted for candidates other than Pelosi, who worked to crush a Democratic insurgency that initially appeared to threaten her speakership bid. 6 Republicans voted against McCarthy. Okay, so those are the facts of sort of the circumstances of her voting. I recommend reading more articles about this from the past few months to sort of go over the situation of why there was a challenge to her in the first place. I'm not going to go over that right now. I want to more go into what her confirmation as Speaker means going forward. Her being confirmed to another term is a problem for Democrats, I would argue, from both policy and politics perspective, but today I'm just going to talk about from a politics perspective, because I could do a 20-minute video on all of the issues I disagree with Nancy Pelosi on, single-payer healthcare being one. I don't think she's come out to the right side of that. I could also do a 20-minute video on why I think single-payer healthcare is the way to go, but today I think I'm just going to focus on the politics reasons why her being a Speaker of the House is not going to be good for Democrats. So the first reason I want to go over is that Nancy Pelosi represents the corporate centrist wing of the Democratic Party. According to the Center for Responsive Politics, Pelosi raised over $4 million in campaign contributions. Her top donors include financial LLCs such as R&S Associates, tech companies like Alphabet Inc., as well as health insurance companies and hospital lobbies. Now, according to Pew Research, 77% of Americans say that there should be hard limits on campaign spending, and that's especially true among Democrats. And this isn't really all that surprising. I mean, we've seen candidates like Bernie Sanders, when he ran for president, got about 45% of the Democratic vote. Certainly not enough to win, but certainly enough to be formidable in the Democratic Party. And one issue that he was talking about, even tried to get Hillary Clinton to concede on, was the idea that money in politics is a corrosive aspect of our political system. And according to the polling data, Democrats and Americans in general seem to agree. Now, additionally, a recent Gallup poll found that Nancy Pelosi's approval rating is at a 9-year low among Democrats. Now, just from a politics perspective, nothing to do with policy here, it might not be the best idea to put somebody in a position of power who your constituency not only doesn't like, but is doing things that your constituency very specifically hates, like take lots and lots of money from tech companies, the financial sector, and the health insurance industry, which is trying to push against a single-payer system. Now, let's look at how Americans feel about a single-payer system in the first place. The vast majority of Americans, 70%, now support Medicare for All, otherwise known as single-payer healthcare, according to a new Reuters survey. That includes 85% of Democrats and even 52% of Republicans. Only 20% of Americans outright oppose the idea. Now, by taking all of this money from, the health insurance industry, who very specifically does not want single-payer healthcare to go into place because it would affect their profits, she's at least halfway showing that she's not really on the side of the vast majority of Democrats and even the majority of Americans in this case. Now, what does Nancy Pelosi think about single-payer healthcare? Well, in September, she said that single-payer healthcare is, quote, not a litmus test or should not be a litmus test for Democrats. I'm not really in favor, I've never really loved the idea of a litmus test. I like the idea of seeing nuances. If somebody if somebody doesn't agree with you on one particular issue, in my opinion, that's not really enough for, you to say, well, you shouldn't be a member of our party, it's not really worth voting for you. But if you're gonna have a litmus test, single-payer healthcare is absolutely one that Democrats should go with. Because, once again, 70% of Americans, regardless of political affiliation, seem to support single-payer healthcare, as well as 85% of Democrats. A litmus test isn't as much of a problem if 85% of your party agrees, because if you go with the other 15% that doesn't agree, well, then you're just not very good at playing politics, because you're going with something that the vast majority of even your own party doesn't agree with, regardless of the other party. Even 52% of Republicans support single-payer healthcare. So on that specific policy issue, it just seems that Nancy Pelosi isn't really aligned with where the rest of the country is. Now, The Hill came out with another article. I believe this was before Nancy Pelosi actually got confirmed, but the issue that they're discussing remains true because they said that Nancy Pelosi is likely going to be confirmed, and if she did indeed get confirmed, this would be an issue. So they say, quote, top progressive lawmakers, Representative Ro Khanna and Representative-elect Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, said this week that they will vote against bylaws to govern the 116th Congress, a challenge to House Minority Leader, now Speaker, Nancy Pelosi. They are objecting to the inclusion of what's known as a pay-as-you-go budgetary rule, which requires that legislation be deficit neutral, meaning that any costs would need to be offset with new revenue or cuts elsewhere. Now, you might hear that and think, well, that just seems smart, right? We want to make sure that we're actually paying for whatever we're spending money on. We don't want to explode the debt, in other words. Debt really only matters as a percentage of GDP. And while yes, the United States has the highest debt of any country in the world, debt as a percentage of GDP is not nearly the highest in the world, and it's not even the highest in U.S. history. So when you really put it into perspective, it's not like we're about to go over the cliff with some sort of debt crisis. And here's the main problem with this policy of pay-as-you-go budgetary rule that's being proposed here. With Congress, they always seem to want to go with cuts over increases in revenue. Cuts can easily be made by both Republicans and centrist Democrats, and President Trump will definitely sign them into law. And the reason for that is that cuts tend to go to areas that Republicans and centrists really have no problem cutting. Areas include Medicare, Medicaid, sort of social safety net kind of programs. They don't go towards actual wasted spending. Now, one area that you could really cut a lot and a lot of wasted spending is the military, for example. The United States military budget is larger than that of the next 7 countries combined, 5 of which are allies, 2 of which are adversaries, and none of which are enemies. Yet there's no Now, why does Congress continue to vote to have such a large military budget? Well, typically it's because there's a jobs program in a district of a particular representative who votes for it. For example, in one of the recent military budget increases, it included a provision to build a bunch of new tanks. The Pentagon actually specifically said, don't build these new tanks. We have literally nowhere to put them. That's not really how warfare works for us anymore. We don't need them. Please don't build them. Congress approved it anyway because it was a jobs program in districts of particular representatives to continue to build these tanks. Yet despite all this waste, there's no way that Trump and the Republicans are actually going to go along with military budget cuts. That being the case, the cuts have to come from somewhere, and really the rest of the budget goes towards Social Security and other social programs like Medicare and Medicaid. Republicans like Paul Ryan in the past have continued to push support for cutting programs like Medicare and Medicaid. Now, even though the Republicans don't have the House of Representatives anymore, they still have the Senate, and they still have enough Republicans in the House to align with some centrist Democrats to get some of the policies they might want pushed. And when you have someone like Nancy Pelosi who wants to go along with this pay-as-you-go budgetary structure, it's conceivable that they could make some kind of cuts to programs like Medicare and Medicaid, programs that a lot of struggling Americans really need if you really look into the data. So strictly from a politics perspective, it's pretty clear to me that electing Nancy Pelosi to a second term as Speaker of the House isn't really the best idea for Democrats. I will admit I'm not really sure who they should have gone with in the first place. I didn't really see a strong challenger. A lot of people on the left pointed to people like Ro Khanna and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, but the thing is, they're just not that experienced. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is, I believe, 29 years old, and she's entering her first term in Congress. Need a little bit more experience to be Speaker of the House. Same for Ro Khanna. I think he's going into his second term now. I really like Ro Khanna. I think he's going to be a great leader for Democrats in the future, but I think he might be a little bit too inexperienced. Unfortunately for Democrats, that means another term of Nancy Pelosi, and for all the reasons I just laid out, that's not a great idea for political reasons. So thank you guys so much for watching this first content-related video. Please make sure to like this video, subscribe, share it, recommend it to friends. Thank you so much. See ya.